So we're just at the hour, and therefore, what I'll do before handing over to our chairs is to show the antitrust policy slide. We show this at the beginning of every meeting in the OpenChain project and across all the LF projects. You can find the full antitrust policy of the Linux Foundation on its website, and if you're from a member company, you can ask any questions of our counsel, Andy Updegrove. Well, with that, that's my formal part of the meeting over, and I'll hand over to you, Matthew, if that's all right.
Thanks, Shane. Can I share my screen?
Absolutely, it's all yours.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining today's OpenChain AI Study Group session. We are going to be doing a recap of what we discussed at the last study meeting. Shane has already gone through the antitrust policy, so let's skip over that. We were very fortunate to have colleagues from Fujitsu give an overview of some copyright IP in the AI space that I'd like to talk about first, and then we can kind of carry on to talk about the other aspects. That meeting was recorded, and the slide shown on the screen has the meeting recording, has the slides and the video. So this will be my last slide before I hand over to our colleagues at Fujitsu. Kind of the key points we wanted to cover, and we did highlight this at the last meeting, is that for AI compliance, there are sort of a lots of different components that we have looked at over the last few months. And I think the way that OpenChain works really well is kind of coming up with this minimal viable product for managing the movement of AI-related artifacts over the supply chain. And I think the colleagues at Fujitsu, where we're talking about copyright, kind of really plays to the strengths of OpenChain, given the fact that we have sort of an ISO standard in that area. So it would be good to hear from them to present that. But then afterwards, we'll kind of come on to the second 2 points here, which is looking at that ISO standard 5230, which is around license compliance, and see if there are any commonalities with AI compliance in the supply chain. And we started doing that at the last session. I will bring up the ISO standard later, and we can kind of have a debate and open discussion about what their commonalities are. We won't have time this time, but next time we thought we would start discussing another ISO standard, not an OpenChain one, 42001, which is around AI management systems. But our final goal is maybe to come up with some common principles. What they are is still to be discussed, but I think copyright is probably going to be a key one. So if I can hand over to our colleagues now from Fujitsu, they can take control of the screen, and we can open up to copyright discussion, and then we can come back to that commonalities. I can't recall who from Fujitsu was going to lead the slides. I know there's a number of our colleagues from there.
Okay, thank you, Marshall. Miura-san, can you share your screen?
Sure. Just a moment, please.
Sure.
This one.
Presentation.
Okay.
Oh,
Can
well.
you see my screen?
Yes, it's working well.
Okay. Hello there. Thank you very much for attending my session. I'm Masaki from Fujitsu, and I'm currently exploring the application of generative AI in software development. One of my biggest concerns in this process is the risk of copyright infringement. Therefore, I'd like to discuss how you all are handling issues related to copyright infringement, such as the following, like in this slide. Do you have sufficient measures against the risk of copyright infringement by using generative AI? For example, the conditions for incorporating code developed with help by generative AI into OSS or product. how to minimize the risk of copyright infringement by code developed with help by generative AI, and effectiveness of marking to later identify code with help by AI, like that. In my opinion, the risks other than the copyright issues can be sufficiently mitigated by existing methods such as test, review, and applying tools like SCA. However, regarding copyright issues, while there are several measures available, it remains unclear whether these are sufficient to significantly reduce the risk. This diagram organizes the general relationship between the amount of input information, the x-axis, and the amount of output code, the y-axis. When we classify in this way, the only area that can be said to be almost certainly without problems is the bottom navy area, which is the very limited case. So, while there is a tendency to need more caution as we move to the upper left, this area, this does not necessarily means that the risk is sufficiently low in other cases. Not safe, I think. This slide shows an example of guideline for making it as clear as possible that there is no similarity of code to existing code. However, as many of you may have noticed, almost all of the tasks from number 1 to number 4 here, almost all of the tasks depends on human developer. So I believe it would be desirable to automate these tasks further. I guess this must be very difficult right now. The remaining 2 pages illustrate the relatively safe or risky usage methods, as well as characteristics of relatively safe or risk code as part of a guideline for developers. This page shows the relatively safe or risky use, and the next page shows the patterns of relatively safe or risky codes. I don't read all of them. Finally, I'll display the first slide again. I'd appreciate hearing your thoughts and measures regarding the risk of copyright infringement by using generative AI for coding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miura-san. And can you just go back to the slide of the issues? I think it's just
This one?
yeah, yes. And I think that this is the first time for the Fujitsu to just share those things with an AI study group, because we have a lot of things to consider about just shipping out the products or just the services to the customers, and there's no just a rigid resolution for just avoiding those kind of things, because just laws or rules just differ from the country to country, and also it's the rule itself is just developing corresponding with an advance of the technology. And so our just proposal is just thinking about that the actual best practices that now OpenChain had just processed in for the organization's best practice about copyright compliance. And can you go to the next slide? Yes. And there's just a lot of things to think, and also that there's a lot of just there's a 2 axis, but there's many kinds of just a way to just explain about the risk one. And so now our suggestion is that first we are thinking about how to mitigate those risks, and just applying the open chains approach would be just fruitful to resolve the solution, the current situation. And my our suggestion is that we saw that in this US and Europe area study group, the issue and goal is not so fixed, not yet. So it's a very good timing, we think, that just there's one example that this will be the just resource we corporately think about it. So yeah, so yeah, that is the thing that we would like to explain for now. And first we would like to ask some comments or questions about from the participants.
Thank you, Tom, for that nice summary. I'll open it up for discussion.
Hi, this is Dave. That was a great presentation and introduction to those issues. One of the things that some folks are thinking about for the piece around the code review piece of it is if the editing is robust enough, then you can potentially claim, that there was sufficient human involvement for purposes of securing copyright in some of the more conservative countries where it's harder to do so, where the expressive component for copyright is considered to be a higher bar. I don't know if you necessarily have the answer to this, but what is the baseline that you're looking at? Are you looking first at Japan copyright laws?
Yes, originally we are just based on the Japanese copyright rules, but not specific. And just Miwa-san, just can you go back to the first slide that explain such kind of things? Yeah.
Which page do you mean? I don't
Yeah.
have this slide.
Just saying about the Japanese law or just general law things that there's I think there's a statement.
It was appendix, but I removed it before
okay.
sending it.
Yeah.
So
this. Yeah, this is originally just Japanese law, but not limited to the Japanese one, because the Japanese law do not just make it not a harder restriction compared to the United States or European countries, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To be fair, I mean, these are all good international issues. Can I get your reaction to this thought that I'm having here? If an engineer is working in a traditional IDE and encoding, there are already some editing tools that are made available and some just suggestions that are already built into that environment. Now that we have generative AI, writing substantially more and potentially even complete, files and more. It just seems like it's the prior situation just made much more robust. So would it be fair for you would you agree with the characterization that this is more of a gradient? It's more like it's a sliding scale where now we're just at the end where there's much more support coming from the IDE versus a more simplistic, like fill in the blanks and suggest how to complete a particular line of code. Maybe I should ask that a different way.
Yeah.
With if I'm running a Copilot, for example, to help me on a coding exercise, would it be fair to say that Copilot is just a much stronger version of providing coding suggestions than a pre-Gen AI IDE?
Yes, I think.
Yeah, I think so. But my concern is that, for example, when we use the GitHub Copilot, the suggestions from GitHub Copilot is based on the GPT 3.5 or 3.4, GPT-4. So it is not completely copyright safe. There is a risk. There must be a risk of copyright infringement, I think. Of course, the GitHub have tried to remove such risks, but it's very, very difficult, I think. So the risk is remaining there.
Yeah. When you pivot to the copyright infringement question, what are your thoughts on taking a model, or taking a partially trained model, let's say a fully trained model, and then doing the fine tuning on your internal software? Let's say if you're a big enough company, you might have a repository of internal software, and then when you deploy that, then let's say it's Fujitsu, okay? Then it would be a lot more proportional representation potentially of Fujitsu coding patterns in that software than it would have been before it was fine-tuned on Fujitsu code.
Yeah. Yes, it can be one solution. But as for the GitHub Copilot, it is impossible to replace the LLM from the GPT to our original model. But I think the GitHub Copilot Enterprise support the fine-tuning. It will support fine-tuning, so it might be possible. But I think the possibility can be reduced, but it will not be zero.
Yes, I agree. If the risk of third-party copyright infringement is X, then if you fine-tune it on your own software, then it's X minus Y. But I don't know that there's any science around what those parameters are right now. We don't know. We just know that it ought to logically help, right? Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Jimmy, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, apologize if my audio quality is poor. I'm in an outdoor environment. But thank you, Osaka Senowitz, for the excellent presentation. It's really great to have you share this. My question to you is, do you think that transparency as to the data the Gen AI model has been trained on is important? And I'm then specifically thinking, if we know what code libraries it has been trained on, we could then configure SEA tools to be more sensitive or accept or flag near matches for that sets of code that we know it has been trained on, compared to if we know, for example, that this public library of code, it's not been trained on that. So if it repeats a line of code or a few lines of code, we would have sort of a stronger argument to say that, well, it's never been trained on this, so it's independently created, probably no creative height, so there's no case of copyright infringement here. I'm just curious if you guys are thinking along the same lines, that data transparency would be an important element to be able to mitigate this risk.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But the biggest problem, it's my personal impression is that generative AI is not just working only for the copyright compliance. And so the total clarity of the original data is just the best way for the copyright compliance, but not a very good way for the generative AI just providers. And so our thinking is not, we are not asking the generative AI operator to do the very clear way, but just asking like an common ground, like just recording the version or the timing of the when you make just a code using the generative AI, and so it's be traceable, but not asking at the time the clear origination data or something. This is just only an example. And so the level of the requirement is just differs from time to time. And for example, in the like 2 years later, we can just cooperatively asking the generative AI operator about such kind of thing. And so we are not asking the pure word, but just a practical thing. This is just my personal impression. And if there's an additional one, Mira-san, please add some comment.
I'm afraid that I don't understand enough what you're looking, but my opinion is that if the data set is completely copyright issue free, it's a perfect solution. But in reality, it's nearly impossible to use such data, such LLM provided by AI, generative AI vendors such as GitHub or Microsoft and other OpenAI. So there is no perfect solution in today, I think.
Thank you. So a clarification to my questions. I don't think we'll ever see a complete issue-free or copyright issue-free data set, but having transparency as to what code has it been trained on, that would allow me to fine-tune my source code analysis tools to sort of be more or less sensitive for matches against the trained data if the AI tool is generating that. And if that's a way to mitigate risk, presuming that we have sort of transparency, what data the tool has been trained on.
And Jimmy, to your point, is this what you're getting at around part of this is transparency and listing those data sets, for example, and maybe even fine-tuned data sets in some form of AI bill of materials that can be shared between partners, so the company, the customer can then make informed decisions on any copyright infringement.
Precisely, because if I say, for example, these are arbitrary numbers, but say that I know that library X on GitHub has been used to train this data set, I might only feel comfortable with like a 70% match of my SAE tool against lines of code in that, while on the other hand, if I know for a fact that another library hasn't been used, I might feel comfortable with a 90% or even 95% match in the tool against that. Because I would have a stronger argument saying that this is not a copyright infringement because this has been sort of generated in a clean room environment.
What do others think to that point? Does anyone else have any other questions?
Can I share my screen just
Of
only
course.
one slide? Okay. Yeah, just a moment. Oh, can Miura-san, can you just
Sorry.
off the
Stop.
screen?
Okay.
Yeah, stop sharing screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. How can I stop this button?
Okay, so just sharing my screen, just only one slide. And yeah, this is the one. Yes, this is. And the thing that I suggested is that now OpenChain and the generative AI copyright issue. And for the OpenChain, the good thing that the Mark Gishi is done is at a good level of abstraction and not digging into the industry specific internal process or just a difference of the individual license. And just simple and clear terms are just fabricated for the OpenChain specification. And the goal is just trust over supply chain. It's very simple, and we can share those OpenChain specification. And thinking about the generative AI copyright issue, as they say that there's a lot of rules and rules difference. Like fair use is just only applicable in the United States, and extraterritorial thing and many things are just changing, and also just the rule itself is just developing. And so we are not digging, just aiming for the sole resolution, because the resolution, just the ideal one is just also changing from time to time. But we think that the goal would be just sharing and fostering the good practice with companies and like just actual companies. Fujitsu is also trying to just make a product or services to the customers, and also many companies just joining this AI study group would also provide the services and products to each countries or just many countries all over the world. And that will be just now origin to the power for requiring the generative AI providers. That's related to just Jimmy's comment, I think. And so what is, it's just a blank, but we can just cooperate with generative AI copyright issue in the AI study group, just like not corresponding precisely, but the resemblance of the OpenChain specification. That is my additional slide, and would like to just making a comment.
I can see this is helpful to understand, again, OpenChain, thinking of clear and simple terms, a good level of abstraction, rather than having those internal processes going down too detailed, which is what OpenChain is not focused in. It's more focused in that clear, higher level abstraction to build that trust over the supply chain. So I like this, that this is kind of documented, certainly the way I have inferred OpenChain to be. So the question I have for you is, what, you say this is a good topic for an AI study group. I personally agree with that, but where do you see kind of those next steps? Do you see others contributing in their own jurisdictions, or what would you like to achieve out of this?
Yeah. And so this is blank, but just we would like to ask many participants that what would be the just this focus, but the discussion itself is just a very good way to think about in this AI study group, I think. And yeah, thank you much.
So what do other people think here? Victor, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I read about there's some United Nations effort to coding of international law, because copyright, when it goes global, there's a lot of jurisdiction differences. Do you think it will be helpful to put that in scope for like what codification is going to help in this case, in copyright and anything international.
If I can just understand your question correctly, is it about defining the origin of where the data set is or the model, so then companies can make a decision on where that jurisdictional copyright queries can be directed? Is that where you're coming from, or I misunderstood?
Close. So basically, going back to so United Nations have a effort initiative to. It's not a new effort, but I think in recent years there's a new effort to codify the international laws so that it will be the same law across borders. So yeah, so for software it's already a problem because different countries have a different laws almost. So cross-border is even harder, and with generative AI is even harder. Do you think it'll be helpful to at least look at it and see whether maybe kind of go back to? I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not interested in for example, if you go back to instead of the current laws, just go back to the theory of law and see whether that's going to help sometimes guide how to do things.
What do people think to Victor's proposal?
Yeah, that
Just
might
kind
be
of-
a way. Yeah,
ahead.
just go ahead. Yeah, that's
No,
okay.
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this might be one way, just digging into the kind of data origin on some part, and the difference of the jurisdiction is one part. But the original thought that of the Fujitsu people is just only the generative AI providers, and so yeah, I think it's a very good comment, and also that this would be the clue to this part. I think yeah, that's a comment. Yeah. And please go ahead.
Yeah. A couple comments. One is, I don't know, Rolando, if you have a link to that effort, I would be curious about it. Second, I think the UN, on this kind of an issue, I think they may not really be enfranchised to be able to pass any kind of legislation. But it would be interesting if they were trying to do some harmonization effort so that, countries could consider a model law for consideration and a potential adoption. There's obviously a lot of fragmentation out there, and I think the Gen AI use case just highlights that existing fragmentation. There's other organizations like AIPPI that work to try to provide recommendations for consideration for harmonization cross-border. So that's another place to potentially look. But I think we probably agree that it's good to be aware of those things, but it might be out of scope as something for OpenChain on AI to depend on. But it's a good thought. I think. Appreciate it.
And Dave, just to your point, I think Sandra's just put a link in the chat around what the United Nations landmark resolution on AI is. It's available in the chat.
Cool. Take a look. Thank you.
And I think I agree with Dave here. Very useful to be aware of. Let's put it on the table. I think it's probably slightly outside of the scope of OpenChain, but we can always have it open for discussion. Any other points here? Misaki-san, what are your next steps here for this copyright issue? Do you want to carry on the discussion with, I guess, more slides next time to aid the discussion?
Our question is that I think it's our proposal is a little bit different from the the discussion in this AI study group, like in the last month or just the more previous months. And so, yeah, we would like to just see that how you or just all members think about this proposal, and yeah, that's the way to proceed. So I think that a small discussion will be fruitful after just seeing our slide and just thinking about the previous efforts. I think it's a personal comment, but yeah, there's not just only this is the one that we can provide for now, and so yeah, next will be just a discussion on how to make the like direction of the AI study group, or just what this is could be the one to pick, and but yeah, just to yeah, that's my current comment, I think.
So if people have further comments, reach out to either the mailing list or Fujitsu directly on I guess progress in this area, and we can have a discussion either through email or the next time to discuss the progress of this area.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone from Fujitsu and others for commenting here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's move on unless there's any other points. Thank you. So I just see in the chat before we get onto the other topic, we have Steph from OSI here, and there's some news on, well, I won't spoil the news. Steph, do you want to, I guess, talk about the OSI news?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know that we have made a lot of progress in the past months since the last time I presented at the OpenChain group, that the open source AI definition has reached a stage where it's now feature complete, which means that we have in the draft document, we have all the elements to evaluate the existing AI systems and see if they comply or not. So I'd like to have all of you, to join the effort to grab basically one of the existing AI systems and go through the definition draft to see if it really matches your expectations. Tying to the conversation before about provenance, for example, the definition open source AI puts lots of emphasis on having availability of information for where the data was coming from, where the scope and characteristics of how the training data was assembled, its provenance, labeling procedures, if there were any, and that exactly to go into finding a little bit of a balance between knowing what went into the training set without necessarily having to impose the mandatory distribution of that data, since distribution of data gets into complicated territories when it comes to intellectual property management, privacy management, and other issues. We found this balance by requiring a lot of detailed information about the data itself, not necessarily the original data set. So I really encourage you to check the definition, the draft definition, because in the next few weeks, we would really like, in absence of major concerns and major issues discovered, we'd really love to move forward with calling a release candidate, and through the summer go on a very large worldwide tour to present it in multiple places to gather more support and announce a stable version by the end of October. If you have any questions and curiosities, I'm available directly. I'm on the study group mailing list, and of course, privately or in public on the forums maintained by the OSI.
Thanks, Steph. And you put a link in the chat, is that right? Do you want to open that up and share anything there?
I can share, yes, I can share the link to the discussions and the instructions for the validation phase on the chat.
Thanks, Steph. So action to all to review that OSI document and provide comments soon, and reach out to Steph if there's anything particular that you'd like to discuss.
Thank you.
Hey, I've got an initial couple questions, Steph. Yeah, I don't know if this is a good time to ask it, but maybe just at a high level. I noticed that there's a couple elements in there that are, I would say, unconventional relative to the industry practice today. One is like, all the code necessary for duplicating the training. I mean, aside from the data sets, all the like data pre-processing, any special scripts, I assume, necessary to parse that data. Do you know of any models today that are out there, any well-known models that are out there today that are adhering to this proposed standard? If it were today?
That's what we're trying to find out. I know of a couple. One is Pythia and StarCoder. I mean, the ones from Big Science. They have those elements. There is another one from a group they have a paper called LLM 360. They also share a lot of that information. But I agree with you. It's one of those places where we probably should pay a little bit more attention. It's one of those who might expose some surprises.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thanks. I'll take a look. And then another quick one, we see licenses like the Open Rail license, and then, sort of folks who add responsible AI terms on top of existing open source licenses. How would you see that fitting within the framework of OSI approved licenses for model architecture?
Yeah, I don't think they will. And in fact, it's really complicated. We're really working. I'm really pushing the OSI board to write a comprehensive review of why those licenses would fail, and be a little bit more specific, trying to argue more concretely about why diverse legislations or over time, or the enforcement, even in practical terms, is difficult, complicated, if even possible. But I think that those licenses will, I'm quite sure those licenses will fail the definition.
Okay. All right. Thanks for those quick responses. I'm going to definitely look at this in more detail. It's certainly very interesting and good for us to be aware of.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Just picking up on Dave's point, I think that review of why things would fail by the board, I think that would be quite helpful and informative for the community. So if anything is produced in that area, then please come back and share it with this audience. I think they'd find it quite helpful. I certainly would.
Yeah.
Will do.
Right. So the only other topic we had on the agenda was to go back to the slides I started at the beginning and kind of do that comparison or have a look at 5230. I just wanted to pause though before, in case anyone had any other topics they wanted to bring up. Hearing none, I will go back to sharing my screen. So this was kind of where we left off before. And the way that we took the last Asia-Europe work group session, we wanted to kind of start progressing some of the work that had been done in subsequent sessions. I come back to this slide that had been previously presented, and I think it was either Dave or someone from Qualcomm whose slide this is, around kind of just having a high-level view of what data or model AI equivalent would look like. And there's clearly different components that we will want to pick out. And for each of these components, whether it's the data set and the data card, or the model and the model card, or the user and training and inference, there's probably a list of process compliance that we might want to look into. There's a lot of things. And if we recall from a couple of months ago, there were a lot of things that we could actually pick up on. And I like the fact that copyright concerns were highlighted in that list a couple of months ago, and we heard a great presentation earlier on in this session that could sort of expand in this area. And the way that I see us maybe progressing, and happy to discuss if we want to go down this route, is I think we're going to be too ambitious to try and cover all of this for all of those use cases, for all of the different types of parts of AI, whether it's data or models. But there's probably some examples we can pick out. We have probably more experience in the copyright area from all of our knowledge from 5230. So I think that's probably a good place to start, and we'll expand that out with what we've discussed before. But I did want to move, and maybe we can just spend half an hour on this topic around looking at that approved ISO standard and picking out things that maybe or may not be directly related to the AI world. When we did this last time, I think there were a few that were quite obvious. And what we did is we had a working session, and I'll bring it up in a moment, where we simply highlight things that we probably do want to have in the AI principles agreement, and then there'll be things that are just not quite relevant and not appropriate, or and we can kind of color those in red or probably yellow in some cases where we, you know, as I saw from that previous list, there's probably far too many things for us to focus on. So this is going to be a slightly different type of meeting now for the next half hour compared with what we had before, but it worked well, I think, last time, where I'll bring up the 5230 standard and we can go through the list. We can see what the Europe Asia team thought would be relevant and would be useful for an AI agreed standard, and then we can open it up to debate of whether we think it would be useful for, I guess, that end goal of producing some agreed standards, agreed principles. Does this make sense? I'm not hearing any comments, so I infer it is. I'm just going to enlarge this. So this is the standard that we in OpenChain worked on for many years, and in 2020 was first published. As I said before, we just went straight to the requirements portion of this standard, and we started going through and we're reading them. And I'll get down to the section and then pause. Reading through the individual requirements and then working out whether we think that would be helpful for an AI equivalent. And the idea is that if things are green, great, but if things are yellow and red, then it starts a discussion to see whether we do or don't want to include it. And so I'd really like people to come off mute and provide their comments about whether they do think it should or should not be included. And I've got the document open and with colors here, and that's from the previous group. If we are in disagreement, then this can be brought back to the other group and we can come up, but I don't think it's going to be too controversial. So the purpose of this is to come off mute and make your voices heard about whether you think things are consistent with what we want to get out of an AI agreed set of principles. So coming on to the first point here. So in the ISO standard, we talk about policy that are written open source policy should exist that governs open source license compliance and supplied with software. The policy shall be internally communicated. The last group of people that we worked through, they thought, yes, there probably is an AI equivalent. You can imagine in your company, or if OpenChain is wanting to provide these good principles, we say you should have an AI policy. What that is down to your company. The specifics for internal discussion, as was brought up last time. But do we agree here, and do you understand kind of what we're trying to get out here? That that the end goal is probably that we have a written AI policy within a company.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. This is Brian Adams here. Welcome. I think at a high level, this makes a ton of sense. We obviously would need to wordsmith it. I think the focus on compliance for open source makes sense. I think that verb may not make sense in the AI space because so many things are more fungible. But if we can take a little bit different angle on it, I totally agree. I think a policy is step one.
So, great, thanks, Brian. And again, yeah, we will wordsmith this. This is not the cut and paste word open source for AI. And I think this is an easy one to start with. I'd like to think there's 23 people on this call representing a slightly smaller number of companies, but I'm hoping other people will come off mute and say, yes, we think that the opening requirements should be that a policy should exist within a company. Others want to comment?
I think I was on the last call where I said that we should, so I'm not saying it again, but yes, I think.
Okay. And we've got some people in the chat as well, agreeing. Okay. Nice and easy one. I hope you kind of understand what I'm trying to get out of this. We have a well-established ISO standard. We're wanting to work towards some other agreed principles and just utilizing what we've got here. So the next one is around competence and identifying roles and responsibilities within a company that would be sort of have competencies for certain tasks. So determine the necessary competence of program participants fulfilling each role. So I can imagine this as engineers, software developers, they are understanding what the open source license would be. You can imagine a direct comparison between those dealing with AI models, even AI data sets, a whole host of roles here. They're understanding their necessary competencies. Again, we may not define what that is, and the participants will definitely be different from the open source license area. But again, we define competencies. And they're moving down to the next one. They have the relevant education, training, and experience, and where applicable, take actions to acquire necessary competence. And we retain documentation as evidence of competence. So again, are we in agreement here? And I think these are the least controversial points. So I'm hoping that we either get people come off mute or in the chat saying that they agree that we probably should define this near the start.
Agreed.
Great.
This, Jimmy, I agree as well.
I'm hoping the others are less of agree and we open it up for discussion. But let's move on. And it's great to see Alice has already started thinking about this within Alice's company. So awareness, the organization shall ensure that the program participants are aware of an open source policy, relevant objectives, their contributions to the program, and implications of not following the program. Again, AI being a substitute for policy. There may be additional things that we need to make them aware of. Legislation, something along those lines. But it might be relevant legislation to the purposes of the use case.
I think the process owners need to have awareness of what the regulations are, but I think that the people within the organization, who need to, adhere to the policy, I don't think that they really need to know. I think that those issues should be built into a review process that we'll get to later in this.
Good point, Dave. Program scope. So different programs be governed by different levels of scope. For example, a program could govern a single product line, an entire department, or entire organization. The scope designation needs to be declared for each program. A written statement that clearly defines the scope and limits of the program. The rationale here that to provide flexibility to contrast a program that best fits the scope of the organization's needs. Some organizations may choose to maintain a program for a specific product line, while others could implement a program to govern the supplied software of the entire organization. So my interpretation of this is around defining what is relevant to the use case here. There may be, depending on the organization, the whole organization's responsibility or deliverables would be an AI model. Equally, it could be a different type of company where there are people dealing with the verification of a model and the delivery of a creation of a new model. There's data sets in there as well. So having the relevant people understand what, I guess, a program is defined as within an organization. Okay. Are people finding this helpful, useful, interesting?
I'm finding it
really
useful. It's a good exercise as a baseline approach and thinking about structure and visualizing kind of the depth that we want to provide with a document like this. So I appreciate it.
Good. And
I will echo that, and for the section here as to clarity, I think that's good clarity, because it's compared to 5230. I think it's actually more important to upfront understand the scope of the program. Otherwise, that's something that can happen in sort of bilateral discussions. But here, I think it's more important that one understands that upfront, what is actually sort of covered here.
Thanks, Julie. Okay, license obligations. The Europe Asia group thought this would be probably not quite as relevant. So a process shall exist to review and identify licenses to determine obligations, restrictions, and rights grant for each license. A document procedure to review these obligations are in play. It might be, and if I recall from that conversation, license obligations is something that probably need to be included in this, but it's part of a wider review of obligations. And it might be that we want to state about data set license obligations and model license obligations. So the license obligations section probably needs to be worked on, and isn't probably just a straightforward mapping, given the slightly different use case. People in agreement there?
Yeah, one thing I on this section is, I think in the AI space, an important component of licenses, whether they're open source or commercial, are the intended and prohibited uses of a given model. As we mentioned, the OpenRail license has some commentary on that. A lot of the regulations have some commentary on that. So I think that's something that's important to capture and pass along through the supply chain.
Anyone else?
One question I had about your comment that you just made about the licenses, the model licenses versus data set licenses. Is that presuming that what's being evaluated is a data set for data set license, or was that conversation more about the data sets used to train a particular model that you're looking at?
I think your point has just highlighted the difference there between kind of traditional, I want to use the word easy, open source software licensing where you've got a one license for a component that's going into another product. Here, you've just pointed out several different use cases where licensing can come in, whether that's in the data set or in the model. And therefore, I think the point I was trying to get to is it's more complicated than what is just on the screen here because it's a different use case. And therefore, we need to probably go into more detail of what we think good compliance looks like when we're looking at license obligations. So Rowan has made a comment, layers of obligations, and I kind of agree with that kind of concept.
Got it. Yeah, my thoughts on this is, perhaps this is an area where the ambiguity is more helpful in the sense that this is kind of an evolving field. There's different perspectives or arguments about how a license from a training data set may attach into a resulting model for at least the purposes of how I read this, the obligations and restrictions, for example. So, I think if you try to go deeper, right, you're getting much more into those weeds versus right now, as it's written, I would say that it could cover both. But I also understand and appreciate, the point of this is also to drive the governance down a bit. But I'd also read this as, each person's legal organization, for example, would have to make the determination of which licenses are relevant for a particular use. But those are just my thoughts.
Thanks, Tiffany. And that's always been my stance around the level of OpenChain is maybe not to get too much into the weeds. And obviously it is for the individual or company to define their interpretation of the risk. But we would say for good compliance, one is looking at the relevant license obligations. And we may want to list that may come from data sets and models, but we wouldn't go into any more granular detail of what we're expecting a legal department to do as part of that review. But it's probably highlighting the different areas where licensing can come in. Going back to the diagram that I presented at the start that had come from, I think, Dave, there's kind of different areas where licensing may be relevant from that training data set and users using something, the model itself is going to have a licensing. So maybe we list different components out there, but it would be down to the individual to make a legal determination.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's definitely a need for awareness about the different types of considerations and components that go into, certain decisions. But also as long as it's not necessarily indicating, or implying a certain position about, the tensions that we just discussed.
Indeed. So let's open this up further then. Picking up on Tiffany's point, where do we think there are license obligations in the whole AI landscape? Is that too much of a broad question to ask? Victor's raised his hand. Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, I wonder, even in the software world, there's a problem of actual implementation, because sometimes there's a lot of dependencies. For example, you have a package and you build up another package on top of it. Is there any process or any rules on how many layers that the user is responsible for the licensing? So you have package 1, and then you have package 2, depending on package 1, and then after 10 layers, you get layer 10. Then if you go to the next layer, the user still need to go deep to that level to find out what the first level is what's the license requirement.
I think this is a good example, and others please correct me, of where a company or individual needs to assess risk. So these dependencies, they do contain licenses, and I guess it would be down to individual companies to make that call. Lawyers on the line, please chip in and comment on that.
I think we can, going back to what was spoken about a couple minutes ago, is maintaining the spirit of this. I do agree, this is kind of out of place. It made sense in terms of the document we're looking at, but license obligations being one avenue of analysis, one type of analysis that needs to be performed. But specific to that question, I think we can go high level, like obligations related to like sub-data, data used to create, and keep that spirit, because obviously the boundary shift, level of risk shifts, everything. So at least maybe enumerating a list of the things that need to potentially be addressed would be a good approach, maybe.
I agree, and I think that's what I was hopefully trying to tease out here of what would that list look like. Maybe this is a topic we can. Oh, someone's just come off mute. Go ahead.
Yes, maybe I'm out of scope, but I think that from a broad perspective, license obligations or license information is relevant as one of the aspects to take in consideration in the context of AI. So for example, if we just take a look at data sets, yes, license information is critical, but from a compliance standpoint in AI, we will need to take a look at other things like, in my view, provenance, or how the data has been collected, or I mean, maybe it's too soft a value, but it's a very relevant value for companies that are applying the use of data set in AI training. There is I don't want to go into too much into the moral context of it, but if data has been, for example, collected in a not very good process, that will impact in the overall commercialization of an ending model. So it's part of the risk assessment. Licenses is of course one critical aspect, but provenance, collection, and purpose, it is important from my standpoint.
And I'm just wondering, as you were talking there, if we could get, agreed, wording for each of those. You can see how you can do a cut and paste for all of them. We're going to ensure there is a process in place for reviewing license compliance and provenance and X, Y, and Z, and copyright review and privacy review and all these other points. So you raise a good point there that probably will just expand the certain.
No, I agree. I think it's very difficult, and maybe that should be left to each company to assess risks. What I'm trying to say is that it is not so black and white as it is, for example, assessing open source compliance, because when assessing open source compliance, we have a license to be bound by. When it comes to data sets, there is the license, but there are other aspects that are equally important, at least from my perspective. So if what we are trying to do is to achieve a guidance of AI compliance, those aspects are very relevant in my view. And it is very complicated, but I think we need to think of it at least.
Indeed. And again, picking up on a point we said earlier, it's very complicated. Let's see what we can pick out that is helpful in the first iteration of this. And we highlight, to use your words, the important things that people use to make decisions. We can try and tease those out to see if we can agree any, suitable wording there. Good point.
Thank you.
Shall we move on? So I think this is as far as we got. So moving on, access. To maintain a process to effectively respond to external open source inquiries by inquiries. Publicly identify a means by which a third party can make an open source compliance inquiry and have a publicly visible method, etc. Internal documents for procedure for responding to third party open source license compliance. I think probably because this area is so new, this may be difficult to achieve. But it may be something that is put on, you know, a list of things for later, or maybe it is something that would be useful and helpful and relevant to have for the start. What do others think?
I don't know. I mean, one thing that pops into mind is potential inquiries about like personal information and such, and how that's going to kind of be defined. An organization's responsibility to respond regarding how that's being used under EI regulations and such. So that might fall under here, the kind of ability to respond to external inquiries.
Again, I'd like to echo that. I think that was sort of very well said. It's not a very onerous requirement, and we're not sure what the questions are going to be, but having, you know, an official forum or an official channel for someone to make those inquiries, I think that's a pretty good requirement.
Again, if the goal is to build trust in the ecosystem, having a contact is probably an easy step to have to reach out to a personal group of individuals that can help with queries. So others are saying they agree. Yeah, in the chat. I'm going to move on. If people want to stop me, then come off mute and say something. But the next one, effectively resource. So identify a resource program task. Sorry, identify and resource program tasks. Align accountability to ensure the successful execution of program tasks. Program tasks are sufficiently resourced. Time to perform the tasks are allocated. Adequate funding is allocated. A process exists for reviewing and updating policy and supporting tasks. Legal guidance pertaining to open source license compliance is accessible to those who may need such guidance, and a process exists for the resolution of open source license compliance issues. This to me just seems like basic project management of a task. Rowan has just said, yep, seem like we have to have this. I think that's going to be too controversial to keep in. Agree. Let's move on. Bill of materials. A process shall exist for creating and maintaining bill of materials that includes each open source component and its identified licenses from which the supplier software is compromised. So a documented process for identifying, tracking, reviewing, approving, archiving information, as well as open source component record for supplied software that demonstrates documented procedure was properly followed. There are certainly other groups, SPDX, which have got an AI bill of materials, and I'm sure others have as well. I can see the benefits of having a bill of materials, because if we are providing things to our partners, again, to build trust, I guess we need a bill of materials. And the important thing is the contents of the bill of materials, which will be coming back to things like copyright concerns or transparency, where we are highlighting that we've done a review of licenses. So I think the bill of materials is the communication between companies that we attach to, you know, it becomes the data set or the model card, or it can be called bill of materials. Do we agree that we can kind of concur with my thought process there?
I think that's right. I think when we were discussing this last time, also some sense of the uses that the originator has agreed that the thing can be put to. I think this was mentioned by somebody else earlier in the call, and that they may vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction more than, you know, the applicability of license conditions do. So that might need to be something, an artifact that hasn't been considered in this 5230 standard, something which explains what the regulatory environment in which an object was created was.
Yeah. So again, a couple of months ago when we produced that long list, which I showed before I brought this standard up, I think that point was raised. So the contents of the bill of materials, we can either defer to SPDX or other industry standards, or we can kind of list out things that we think are useful and helpful and relevant. We're probably saying a process shall exist to have a bill of materials. Right, maybe we start moving away now from standards. So a program shall be capable of managing common open source license use cases encountered by program participants. This one just posted in the chat. I need to drop off. Okay, Shane needs to drop off. A program shall be capable of managing common open source license use cases encountered by program participants for supplied software, which may include the following use cases: distributing binary source, contains modified open source, etc., etc. So for me, I'm sure there is an equivalent, I don't know, topic for if we've modified any data set or if we're distributing our model in whatever source it is, form it is. But this is probably starting to diverge, and we'll probably propose amber or red for this one.
This is almost like a test suite, isn't it? It's like if your process needs to be able to handle these things that crop up, and this won't be these things, but you might want a similar list, which basically says you need to be able to handle these kinds of occurrences, otherwise your program isn't ready fit for purpose.
Let's leave that as orange then, because again, it's probably got some threads that we can pick out. We're about 2/3 of the way through. I'm happy to carry on. We've got another 45 minutes of this meeting. Maybe we just carry on another 15 minutes and we can see how far we get to and then pause. Does that seem reasonable with everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Without hearing objections, I'll carry on. So moving to another requirement: compliance artifact creation and delivery. So a process shall exist for creating a set of compliance artifacts for the supplied software. A document procedure that describes the process under which compliance artifacts are prepared and distributed with the supplied software. A document procedure for archiving copies of compliance artifacts for supplied software, where the archive is planned to exist for a reasonable period of time since the last offer of supplied software. I'm quite confused by this one. Anyone else interpret this? This to me seems like a bill of materials. May have misinterpreted this.
I think it's demonstrating that you did compliance work at the time and that you're able to produce the evidence that you did the compliance work, should that be called upon.
See, okay. Well, I think that would probably be important for a use case.
I would agree.
Contributors. So, if an organization considers contributions to open source projects, then a written policy shall exist, a policy shall be communicated, and a process shall exist that implements the policy. My gut feeling is probably a red here. Or maybe it's amber if there are open source models, but we probably want to start diverging here. Conformance. In order for a program to be deemed OpenChain conformant, an organization shall confirm that the program satisfies the requirements presented in this document. I think that's probably reasonable to have, assuming we get that far.
Yeah.
Program that is OpenChain conformant with this version of the specification shall last 18 months from the date. Someone just put a comment in the chat about the previous point about open source AI contributions likely to be covered elsewhere. Duration, I think this is similar to the point above, so we probably want to keep that in here. And that's it. So we managed to get to the bottom. I think a lot of this standard that we've kept in green is probably good framework for what we want to try and achieve. I think the next steps would be to start picking out those points that we raised in the slides here and working out which ones of these are most helpful to the community to have a review to build that trust. And then we can probably add it in to the point that someone made earlier, where that license obligations sections was. We could probably choose which of these are the most relevant and start developing those to see if they are sort of appropriate. Okay. That was the end of the this part of the agenda. I think the only other things that I wanted to highlight was next time we would likely do a review of another ISO standard, 42001. I know some people on this call have knowledge in this area, so that would be good to have discussions there. ISO 42001 is around AI management systems. It's obviously an ISO standard, and we think it's sort of different to what we're trying to get out of this OpenChain study group. So that would be good to bring that to the forefront for discussion. And then maybe we pick up on some of those topics. We've already talked that copyright would be a good area for discussion. We can maybe expand on those. But I certainly think we're going in the right direction. Are people sort of comfortable with this direction and still getting that end goal of some agreed principles in certain areas? Not all of the areas, just kind of minimum valuable product area, kind of, sorry, minimum valuable product for certain ones of those topics that we can always expand on later. Got a thumbs up from Alice.
Yeah, I think so.
Thumbs up from others. Good. I'm well aware it's very late in some parts of the world, very early in other parts of the world. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to bring up and discuss today? In which case, I'm happy to propose that we close the meeting. This will be recorded and the links will be sent out by Shane. There is another working group on Thursday that Shane will kind of share what we have discussed here. And then we meet again the first Tuesday in June. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.